Good evening and welcome to episode 96. Episode 96 of the Political Podcast. What a week it's been. President Joe Biden's State of the Union speech this past Tuesday night came on the cusp of his expected re-election launch and months removed from a better-than-expected midterm election for Democrats. Yet, President Biden's address featured little gloating or political chest-thumping. The contrast that President Biden drew with Republicans were mild compared to the things he said on the stump last fall. Bipartisanship and unity were the overt themes of the night, but that did not stop the raucous noise and heckles that emerged from MAGA Republicans when President Biden said that some of the members of the GOP want to sunset Social Security and Medicare. Take a listen.
Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote.
And of course, that was over President Biden's assertion that the Republicans have actually sought to sunset programs like Social Security and Medicare. Now, take a listen to the senatorial campaign manager, Senator Rick Scott of Florida's response to a Fox News host when pressed about the same topic.
One of the big points of the chart, quote, all Americans should pay some income tax to have skin in the game, even if it's a small amount. Currently, over half of Americans pay no income tax. It also says all federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. If a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. So that would raise taxes on half of Americans and potentially sunset programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Why would you propose something like that in an election year?
Sure. Well, John, that's, of course, the Democrat talking points. It's a
No, it's in the plan. It's in the plan.
But here's this thing about reality for a second. First off, let's talk about Medicare.
But Senator, hang on.
John.
So it's not a Democratic talking point. It's in the plan.
And also in the plan, it says we ought to every year talk about exactly how we're going to fix Medicare and Social Security.
Here to help me make sense of all of this, and also the fact that former Vice President Mike Pence has just been subpoenaed, which is breaking news tonight, is an incredible panel. I'm so excited to have them with me tonight. We've got Mr. Zach Tolan, who is a 2022 Howard University School of Law graduate, Josh Lewis, who is the host of the Saving Elephants podcast. We've got Sammy Cantor and Maddie Medvid of the Girl and Gov, the podcast. Excellent podcast, and they have an excellent social media presence as well. We also have Professor Fred Cook of Howard University School of Law. Thank you each, ladies and gentlemen, for joining the Political Mic tonight. I want to open up the discussion with any thoughts about the State of the Union and specifically the backlash that the president seemed to have gotten from some Republicans who made their voices heard Tuesday night. This is a far cry from the congressman in 2011 who shouted, "You lied," to President Obama, of course. Of course, that was a different era. That was the beginning of the Tea Party era. I want to get your thoughts on what unfolded this past Tuesday as regards to the State of the Union. Anyone can jump.
Okay. It's different. The congressman who yelled at President Obama apologized that evening. He was criticized by the leadership of the Republican Party, who were very direct in saying that sort of behavior was inappropriate and unbecoming a member of Congress. And he was reprimanded by the House of Representatives for his conduct. 12 years later, nobody apologizes. People profess to be very proud of what they did, representative, in fact, of their constituents, and argued that the president provoked this response from these members of Congress who were simply reacting to the provocations of the president. It's a relatively sad state of affairs that the business of the nation can't be conducted in a civil sort of way and can't be conducted without people rationalizing boorish behavior as something that is politics as usual. It's inconsistent with the rules of the House, for example. If you bother to read them, they all ought to be reprimanded pursuant to the rules of the House of Representatives on the decorum side. So, it's a performative sort of environment we're all in. There's a real question as to whether or not the president's State of the Union message ought to be a televised event. why can't he just send a report like was done for many years before? But it's turned into a performance for the president, gets political points for it. I get that. And not just this president, but every president for a long time now. And it's performative now. It's become performative for the opposition party, who used to just sit there on their hands and make faces, but never do anything. Now they can participate. It's a participatory activity. And it's really not very useful, I don't think.
I agree with Fred about the performative nature this has become. And this is kind of my song and dance, that we've really had this slow slide for many, many years. I mean, it was, you go back to, what was that, less than a decade ago with Barack Obama and the "you lie" comment. I mean, how far we've come just in 10 years' time. But we have turned politics into a far more entertaining, performative venture, if you will, for decades now. It was President Woodrow Wilson who started again that tradition of delivering the State of the Union before a joint session of Congress, obviously before television. I will include that in my burgeoning lists of reasons Woodrow Wilson was the worst president of the modern era, and if not for James Buchanan, the worst president we've ever had. Not that it's not necessarily his fault, but he got the ball rolling, and that's one of the many things we have to thank him for, I suppose. I don't think this benefits anyone other than those elected officials. I mean, certainly Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to get to go to her constituents, and she really told Biden off, right? It's not hurting her any. It's not hurting Biden any. He gets to look presidential, but it's not helping the country. And maybe I just sound old and cynical. I don't know, but I think we would do better to make our politics boring again. I think we should get not only this is a little outside the purview of what we're talking about tonight, but not only stop televising this thing, maybe get cameras out of the Senate, period. We want our journalists in there to transcribe what they're saying, and we certainly want to know what's going on in Congress. But we give our elected officials far too much of an opportunity to turn this into campaign sound bites so that they can get their hits on YouTube, which is a very poor way to run a country.
I have to say, I completely disagree. I don't think having politics be boring is helpful to anyone. I don't think it brings any young people or just new blood into politics or gets them curious. And in terms of televising, political events and what's going on there, I think we need to do more of that, not less of that. Yes, for sure. They absolutely want the sound bites. And they will try and do that even if there aren't cameras in the room. That's what a traditional press release is for. So I think, if anything, we need more transparency. We need to see more of what's going on and allow people to actually make decisions around what they're seeing and how these people behave and what they propose, and giving them more access, not less.
I totally agree. And I think the more sound bites, the better. I think because of the way our politics has taken this kind of more dramatic turn, there are obviously so many issues with that, but at the same time, it has really pulled a lot of people to be more engaged than ever. And Sam and I, that's like our bread and butter, which we always are happy to see. And I think the other part, even about the sound bites and having it be performative, like those sound bites end up on platforms where young people are. And again, that's Sam and I's bread and butter. So we love to see it. We love to see that those moments are getting in front of young people so that they can start getting more engaged. And we've also seen such amazing turnout the past 3 or 4 elections, or 3. And I think a lot of that is in part to kind of this crazy new political world we're living in, and the way that it really mobilizes people to pay attention and get involved. And I think the more boring it gets, a lot of the just change that needs to happen falls on deaf ears, and really can get swept under the rug and really decrease engagement in every demographic, but especially among young people who it's our future. And I think it's really important for young people to be involved in paying attention. And sometimes it's those viral sound clips that really are what prompt or inspire a young person to be like, oh, I kind of want to know more about this. It's reminding me of Real Housewives or something. Let's see what this is about.
Yeah, and to that point,
isn't Real Housewives. That's bullshit. I mean, government isn't Real Housewives.
No, but
an old person here. When I was your age, there was no social media. There were no sound bites. There were press releases, and people like me got engaged. And you know why we got engaged? Because being engaged made a difference in my life.
Yeah.
So what I think I'm hearing, and yeah, I get the fact that I'm the old guy on the porch. I'm really all the way in on that. I've got kids the age of all of you, so I hear it all the time from my own children. But I will tell you what it sounds like to me, somebody who's been involved in politics and government from the time I was 18 years old, probably a little bit before that, but anyway, until now, is that this is about me. This is about, well, this is entertaining to me, so that's why it should be done, as opposed to what is good for the country, what is good for governance, what is good for the masses of people. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but sometimes you have to do it even if it is uncomfortable.
I mean,
Right, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more coming from the perspective of being able to get information to people. And that has long been an issue. I think, and polling has shown that young people really care about what's going on in this country. And they continuously have an issue being able to get information on how to get involved and what bills are happening and what politicians are talking about that. And the more quiet it is, the harder it is for people to get involved and access that. And so when we actually shed light on it, we actually bring cameras in the room, we provide an opportunity for young people to see how they can actually make an impact, which they want to do. And so that is like involving what we're doing now in new media and getting that, that connection there. So I think the existence of young people wanting to get involved because of how government should function and the bills they want to see, that's long been a thing for sure. But the access point being an issue is also long been a thing. So I think having more access with cameras, with mics, I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not, and I have no illusion that my side is going to prevail. I am not confused at all about that. So, that it is kind of what it is, but I'm not.
Yeah, and I think
it's not a good thing.
I think people like you two are also exceptions to the rule as far as engagement of like being a young person and being politically engaged. Like history, every generation when they are in that younger demo has not been as engaged as the older demographics, but we've actually seen a shift now in young people turning out to vote and being more engaged now more than ever. And I think that isn't because of access to information.
That's not an accurate statement, but because people of my generation were much more involved than the people of the preceding generation.
It comes and goes in waves. There's no strong rule that young people are not engaged.
Yeah.
Particular, Professor Cook's generation, very much so, very facially was very engaged in the younger generation. I think part of what social media has helped our younger generation. I'm starting to get older now, so
I'm going to say you can't be in this group, Zach. You're an old guy now.
Yeah. But it's helped our generation, kick that off, and we're more easily aware of some of the things happening, at least in the world more broadly. I do agree that cameras and mics being in there, it allows for a degree of accountability. I think it's, for a lot of us, we're still uncomfortable with even the Supreme Court. There is no camera or camera in there, and it does give off this air of trying to maintain this separation and lack of accountability to the country. Maybe it should be unaccountable in that it's not not a political body. But I think the difference is that there's a difference between boring and civil politics, and politics should be civil, which means could mean the clip is boring, but the subject matter is not. I think, particularly this last State of the Union, it looked like Prime Minister's question time, if you ever watched that from the UK. And that is insanity. And I honestly don't know why they still do it, because it's never effective. It's just the Prime Minister getting up there to read a sentence, and then everyone else yells harumph from the other side of the room. It's the pub culture from Britain that's somehow gotten back into the United States, and we fought a war to get rid of that, so I'm not sure why we're letting it back in now. So but the other side of it is that we would completely destroy shows like The Daily Show if we got rid of cameras in Congress, and I didn't want to do that to all the comedians who are getting their guest host opportunities now.
Yeah, I would also say too, I just want to highlight, it's important to also mention that it's one side of the room who really acts this way and has acted this way for a while now. And that like decorum has really been lost on the right. And I just think that's really important to highlight in this conversation, because there is a vast difference in how the two parties behave. And I totally agree, it needs to be civil. But that's clearly been lost upon us over the past few years, and especially amongst one half of the room. So,
well, not to completely disagree with you, and not to make a false equivalency here, but Josh may be happy to hear somebody else saying this, but I remember the last couple of years during Trump's administration, there were plenty of people who were on the political left, the Democratic Party, who were also, granted it's not the same thing, but I believe his second or third State of the Union, President Trump mentioned that there was a large sweeping of women who came in, and all of the newly elected Democratic women members of the House and Senate who'd been elected started cheering. Granted, that's not the same thing, but they also, they didn't stay silent. Nancy Pelosi was making faces the entire time, and she ripped up the speech at the very end of that. That was not, decorum. That was a political show.
So
I don't
want to. I'm sorry, Joe. Let's talk about the scene that unfolded Tuesday.
Yes.
The scene was chaotic enough that Biden had to veer off script and engage in a live policy dialogue with his detractors. That's unusual. And many have said this is the most contentious State of the Union address that has ever happened. And it was thrilling for what's otherwise become a stale tradition. Biden clarified almost apologetically that he was not talking about all Republicans when he said that there are some Republicans that want to sunset Social Security. They still shouted at him to name these Republicans, and he said, "I'm politely not going to name them," but he said that there are some that have been proposing this. And then when they continue to make noise, he said, "Well, I'm glad we're all on the same page." I thought that was brilliant. The 2024 ads roll, it writes itself, right? You have you have not just the sound bite of the noise, but you also have many of their faces shouting at him, saying that's not what we want to do. Now to keep that in mind, because in his 11-point plan, Senator Rick Scott's 11-point plan, some point 7 of point 6 reads, all federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. If a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. The plan doesn't single out Medicare and Social Security specifically, but these are programs that were established by federal legislation and would thus disappear under Scott's proposal if it was enacted, unless they were renewed every 5 years. And this is an impractical idea. Congress cannot rewrite all federal law every 5 years, nor should anyone want them to do this. And so I thought it was rich. Also, the fact that Mike Lee, someone who was on tape saying that he wants his career to be based on sunsetting Social Security, he's acting like he's now clutching his pearls now that Biden is mentioning it publicly, and now that the cameras are rolling. And so I want to get your thoughts on, what the plan says in Rick Scott's agenda. He was, of course, again, this the chairperson for the senatorial campaign for the GOP. I basically want to get your thoughts on the discrepancy between their booing and the plan that they've actually put forward.
And Mike, I will say, starting out, the first and last time I was on this panel with much of the same faces, it seemed like we spent the entire time in violent agreement, and so it's good to hear some back and forth here, and I celebrate that. But Senator Rick Scott, you're absolutely correct. It's as Biden says, some Republicans. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that Rick Scott is like representative of the current GOP House and Senate. Now, that being said, I also don't think there is consensus around this issue. There just isn't. What Paul Ryan wanted to do with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid is very different than what Bernie Sanders has been advocating, which is Sanders to expand the program, to raise taxes in order to make sure it's fundable. Whereas Paul Ryan's view is more of this is an unfunded liability that is only getting worse. We don't know how to pay for this. It's going to sunset whether we want it to or not. Therefore, let's deal with it now, because the earlier we deal with it, the less pain it's going to create further down the road. Now, we could have a really big debate about what dealing with it now actually means. I wished, and I am the possibly lone Republican in the panel, I wish my party were more open about this. And I do welcome that in the State of the Union, Biden at least got us all kind of talking about this again. We're all, with apologies, with the exception of Professor Cook, probably going to live through the fallout of what happens if we don't effectively deal with this. And yes, what's that?
Me too. I'm going to live through this.
I'm trying to be positive that maybe maybe the unfunded liability will. I mean, we're 2000 and
I'm shooting to the other side. I'm going for
2028, I believe, is when we reach the point that we don't know how to pay for this anymore. Now, does that mean we raise taxes on Americans? Maybe. I'm at least open to the conversation, but I think this idea that we're all in broad consensus is just complete baloney. When the crap hits the fan, we're going to find out when people are actually having to make these very difficult decisions. I wish we could get serious about it now, but I think it's going to take when stuff starts to unravel before we start to change policy.
Oh, this country has an awful record of dealing with things before the last minute, especially recently. The debt ceiling is coming up for this very reason. We're not good at planning ahead of time. But I think this also, it bakes into a lot of, particularly in the last, say, about 2 decades or so, fiscal conservatives' strategy, which is a brilliant strategy, about how to get rid of programs that they don't necessarily like. You unfund it or you damage its reputation. By doing that, you then justify cutting its budget further, which makes it less efficient and less effective, which means people dislike it more, which means you can justify cutting its budget even further until eventually, hopefully, you can get rid of it. This is basically the strategy that we've seen being used against the Affordable Care Act, against the post office, against the IRS. And for those people who are not everybody, I think probably not the majority even, but for those people who are anti-Medicare, Medicaid, it's the strategy to go for, is to do what you can to disrupt the system, make it less popular, to the point where you can justify and get popular opinion on the side of do away with it.
No, I think you're right, but it sort of gets back to the word we used a little bit earlier, being performative. I think the president's comment about some Republicans was fundamentally performative. It was designed to throw the kind of classic red meat to base Democrats, who would say anybody who wants to get rid of Social Security or Medicare is just a complete idiot, and I don't want to vote for them. As Zach said, or as Josh said, there is a fiscal structural problem with the program that has to be addressed. There has to be a discussion about how to address it. There can be lots of different views. People like Senator Mike Lee wants to get rid of it altogether and have some sort of private sector function take over. Rick Scott's proposal is to, let it sunset every 5 years, and we'll wrestle with it every 5 years to figure out what to do. Both impractical solutions, in my view. But there is a problem that does need to be talked about, that does need to be addressed. And people who say that out loud aren't usually talking about getting rid of the programs. They're talking about figuring out a way to make them viable for many years down the road. And there's a number of different approaches. And again, I'm not stupid, I don't think. If the president wants to rile up his base and get them to march with pitchforks against Republicans who want to get rid of Social Security and Medicare, I get that. There's a lot of political cachet in that, but it's not moving anywhere toward a solution to a very real problem, and that's what needs to happen, it seems to me.
I agree with that. It doesn't put us any closer to a solution, but I think that moment was really important and kind of monumental back to kind of even that like transparency element of having cameras in the room, having the American people watch this moment, and whether there is even threats of, sunsetting Medicare, Medicaid, to see that all of those people stand up and have that visual, I think was really important to, for a voter, for a constituent to be able to have that moment to refer back to of, if it ever does happen or if Republicans go back on that word, Biden capturing them in that moment, I think was really powerful. And just, again, another amazing way I think that voters and constituents can have some accountability and transparency when it comes to certain issues, and to have, again, just that visual, like everyone standing at the end of, that little conversion, I think was an interesting moment, and one we haven't really seen before, but I think was important for people to see.
So according to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, only 37% of Democrats said that they want President Biden to seek a second term. This is down from 52% in the weeks before last year's midterm elections. Overall, 41% approve of how the president is handling the job. The poll shows that's similar ratings at the end of the last year have happened around that time, around that 41% mark. A majority of Democrats still approve of the job Biden is doing as president, yet their appetite for a re-election campaign has slipped, despite legislative victories that Democrats have been chasing for years. I want to bring your attention to some comments that former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, made in terms of how he explained these polls.
Sometimes the other guy loses. Joe Biden's president because Donald Trump lost. Joe Biden didn't win, and Joe Biden's never taken possession of that fact. And so he continues to do what he did when he was running, which he thinks was great because I won. No, you didn't win. Trump lost. And you can't change who somebody is, John. In the end, Joe Biden is not an exciting candidate. He's old, he's boring, and the American people are not relating to him. And that's why those numbers are the way they are. That was the same in 2020, but he was running against someone who was so toxic that he won anyway. But
I just want to say that's a very rich thing to say about the guy who beat Donald Trump, who won because because Hillary Clinton lost. It's a wonderful argument to make.
Now, another thing that Chris Christie mentioned was that the American people are not resonating with Biden. The thing that I don't understand is how, the data for progress showed that between October 20th and October 31st, the days leading up to the election last year, 54% of likely voters said that they strongly supported the Inflation Reduction Act, which delivered tangible legislative victories on prescription drug prices, clean energy, economic fairness. These are policies that Democrats have been pursuing for years. 78% of Democrats supported the Inflation Reduction Act, while 32% of Republicans supported the Inflation Reduction Act. The Morning Consult poll conducted in 2021 showed that 77% of Democrats, 52% of independents, and 37% of Republicans backed the infrastructure bill. Similar polls have showed majority support for the PACT Act, for the CHIPS Act. Yet you have Governor Chris Christie saying they're not resonating with the president. He's old. He's out of touch. I don't understand. I mean, someone help me make sense of that.
Well, I think you can agree that he's gotten things done that maybe not all of us, but a lot of us wanted or liked. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he, as an individual, is particularly inspiring or necessarily the option we want. I think he would be 86, I believe, at the end of his second term if he were elected. That is old, just very blunt. I think a lot of us, probably know family or friends who didn't even make it to 86. And while he is still walking around and seems more or less with it most of the time, that is still very old. He's not the greatest speaker, and even to a degree, Governor Christie is right. For a lot of people, at least in my bubble of slightly more liberal-minded Democrats, he was not our first choice. He was a significantly higher choice than some of the other choices, particularly the man he eventually beat. But he is not himself the inspirational image that, for instance, Barack Obama was. He's not as charismatic, certainly. So there's a difference between.
Wouldn't you have someone who's on it, in alignment with your policies and able to get bipartisan legislation done in an era where there's such strong staunch opposition, where the objective is now just to block any progress from happening as long as it's coming from the other side. I mean, you look at the litmus of the list, I should say, of not just some of the major legislation victory, but think about the student loan. I'm like striking that perfect balance between the moderates and more progressive wing of the party, so that both sides can say, I didn't get 100% of what I want, but I can get behind this policy. You go down the list since 2021, wouldn't you have someone who's able to execute the wisdom to get that sweet spot in the middle, rather than a young idiot, right? Rather than someone who may not be able to execute policy as effectively, or maybe someone who's just not even well versed with working across the aisle and getting folks like Rob Portman support, and even someone who is like a walking headache, Kristen Sinema, who got elected with the Democratic Party brand, and now all of a sudden she's independent.
Oh, I mean, yes, I'd love to have the guy who gets it done. I'd prefer to have the guy who gets it done and looks like he's going to stay awake for the entire conversation. I very much respect what President Biden has done, and I don't mean to be ageist about it, but it's not just his age either. I can see Professor Cook reacting to that. It's not just the age; it's just in general. It's just not in general. He is not a particularly engaging individual. He was very fun when he was vice president and Uncle Joe, but that is not necessarily the person who inspires a lot of interest in getting behind him. He can be very good on his policies. I think a lot of his policies have been very good. I don't necessarily want him as my first choice for the guy who's going to push it through.
Certainly his age has something to do with it, but as the podcaster Jonah Goldberg often says, even when Biden was younger, because of the gaffes, he would say, you just never knew if the guy was going to shout, somebody get these squirrels off of me. I think he's very intelligent. I do think he's mentally with it, but occasionally says kind of odd things. That being said, speaking as a Republican, I think we look at our presidents as more than just say what they can deliver in policy. To a certain degree, Donald Trump, to a certain degree, delivered policy I liked. And I suspect most of you, the Democrats, would say they did not. But I did not like President Trump. And I don't necessarily mean personally. I thought he was a danger to the Republic from day one. I mean, he said in 2016, when he's running against Hillary Clinton, that he would keep us in suspense on whether or not he would respect the results of the election. So I don't think we just measure it just in terms of policy. I think there are other considerations, one of which is, in my view, that Biden was almost more a compromise candidate. And Zach, I may have spoke to this in a certain degree. I think he was probably the best candidate to beat Donald Trump, and the Democratic Party chose to go, well, let's go with this guy because he can beat Trump. I think he also ran as sort of you will like me, we'll get back to what's normal in this country. Because boy, wasn't these last 4 years kind of crazy. And I'm not saying it's necessarily his fault, but this ain't normal. It seems like it's just as crazy as it's always been, minus the fact that we have a president occasionally tweeting. What was the latest? That he's now insinuating that one of his potential political rivals was grooming young women when he was a kid. So I do think that there is also a sense in which, because Biden is getting older, there could be a genuine fear that maybe he can't beat Trump if it is another rematch. And I don't know if he could or couldn't. I know that, I don't know about you guys. It just feels like we're stuck in this weird inevitability of seriously, is it going to be Biden and Trump again? I remember years ago, I think it was Robert Novak made the comment that he felt like we were going to be stuck between Bush and Clinton for the rest of his life. So I don't think it's going to stay this way, but it does seem, I think there is the open question. Okay, this guy delivers on policy, no question about that. But is my life like what I wanted it to be when he was elected, return to normalcy? And could he do it a second time if Donald Trump runs against him?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things happening. First, yeah, he delivers on policy. I think he's been a very successful president, but I think there's a big messaging issue and a communication issue as far as really being able to effectively communicate that to the public to understand what really these large pieces of legislation that they passed are going to do and affect people's lives. And, we've seen some good stuff, but I think there's just way more on the messaging front that needs to happen in order for people to really grasp the major legislative victories that Joe Biden has passed so far in this administration. And I think to the age thing, and even back to the original question about these polls, I think that's going to be the biggest issue. Even if Biden does find a way to effectively communicate all of these big wins that he's had, the age thing I think is still going to be a major, major issue for him. I know, and I think there's a lot of people who will look at it and be like, why can't we just have another Democrat who's younger, who have the same priorities, take that spot and run instead. And I think that's just like such a simple solution for so many people. It's like, why do we need to go with him again if he's, so old and going to be nearing 90 by the end of his term? So I think that's just something you can't even solve for. Right. And I think that uncertainty of, his age is going to be a major, major blockage as far as like trying to get people behind him in time for this primary and for this election. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think they can do a lot better as far as messaging, but at the end of the day, that age thing I think is going to be a huge issue for a majority of people.
And actually, I was just, as Josh pointed out, it's not just the age. It is, who Biden has been for most of his life. He has not been necessarily the most charismatic of individuals. Mike, I know you love it whenever I'm on here and I bring up something from history. I think it was 1912 when it was Teddy Roosevelt running for his third term versus Taft. Taft had done a fantastic job. He did everything that the policy was for. He was a bigger trust buster than Teddy Roosevelt was, but Teddy Roosevelt was far more charismatic as an individual, and he kept running. He split the ticket, and Woodrow Wilson became president.
That's how we got Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan, I think personally, and I think a lot of people agree, was, from a policy perspective, a terrible president. However, I like the guy personally. He was funny and he was energetic, and he had this image that made people like him. Barack Obama, not sure it's the greatest example because I think he was also great on policy, but he was also so damn cool and is so damn cool. Biden is not that guy. He never has been. He's been the fun old uncle who likes ice cream and trains. He's not the guy to make you necessarily think, well, especially as he's getting older, and he's always not. This is a personal slight on him, but he's always had a stutter and issue speaking. It's difficult for him to make that seem like that impressive, resolute leader individual, regardless of how good he is at getting policies through.
I will put it this way, but in 1911, I guess between that period, the Taft era, 1909 to 1913, I will say that Taft was more of a justice, a federal court justice at heart, than he was a president. And a lot of the victories during that time against certain trusts and monopolies, for instance, came from cases like the U.S. versus Standard Oil case. So I love that period of time, the progressive era, but I also want to bring attention to more modern history. I think 1980 was the case study of how Democrats learned that primarying your own guy in the White House hurts you. You had Jimmy Carter, someone who was polling underwater, multiple crises, both at home and abroad. You had the inflation. You had the gas prices soaring. You had the OPEC oil embargo. You had the Iranian hostage crisis going on at the same time. There was this sentiment that this was a man who was a good guy, but in over his head. And Ted Kennedy puts himself forward. Of course, there was a famous moment when he's sitting with an ABC correspondent and cannot give an adequate answer as to why he wants to be president. But nevertheless, it was a very bitter and nasty campaign between the two of them. And the Democrats ultimately ended up shooting themselves in the foot. Reagan, of course, was by himself a huge juggernaut of a politician. And virtually any successful Republican would have probably swept the scoreboard with Carter, but it didn't help the Democrats. And I think they've learned from that. I think, at this point, we can have charisma or we can have legislative victories, right? And so at the end of the day, which one are we going to choose? And I think we're in an era where both sides just want to win, and they'll do whatever it takes.
I just don't agree with that, Mike. I think the Democrats have learned relatively little about those kinds of things. I think the Democrats make the same mistake again and again, which is sort of what Democrats do. It may surprise some of you that I think Joe Biden is long past his shelf life. And I don't believe that he should be the standard bearer, the proposed president for the so-called Democrat Party the next time around. I think the same argument that a lot of us use with our Republican friends, that you can have the tax policy you want, you can have the border policy you want, but you don't need this jackass Donald Trump to be the articulator of it for you, is the same thing that I say to my Democrat friends, and I do have some of them who are age contemporaries who are in the national legislature. You guys need to turn the keys to the car over to the next generation. This is past you. You had your turn. You did what you did. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it unfinished. I get all that. But your time is up. And they won't do it because they are all too personally invested in being a big deal as an elected official. And it's a mistake. So the Republicans in the national legislature have term limits on who can be committee chairs. The Democrats do not, because they are invested in this quaint notion of seniority being somehow an equivalent to intelligent and competent. It is not the same thing. And so I have watched Joe Biden through all of his national elected office. And I think I said this in class to you guys one time. Joe Biden is a great guy to sit around and shoot the breeze with. One of my law partners went to law school with him. We've known him for a long time. But on most important issues, Joe Biden has gotten to the right place after starting in the wrong place, okay? He is a politician. He is a guy that figures out which way the wind is blowing and he gets over there, but he doesn't intuitively know the right place to be. And that doesn't make him a bad human being. I think he is a good-hearted man. I think he wants to do good. I think his ideas about governance, his ideas about policy are oftentimes screwy, but he gets enough of the politics right that he gets away from the screwy idea to the politically expedient idea. But importantly, his time is up. Now, whether he was 82 or 78 or 70 or 68, his time is already up. He's been there long enough. And there are younger people with the same ideas, better ideas, with charisma, with energy that ought to be driving this bus. But the Democrat apparatus doesn't seem to be able to tolerate that.
I totally agree. And that's what I think too the polls are communicating, is that we think that there is somebody out there that's younger that they can pass the torch to, that still have those same priorities that Biden does and can get things done, that we don't have to worry about that age and that part of it. So I think that that's what Professor Cook just said, I think is exactly what those polls are trying to tell the Democratic Party, honestly.
Totally. And I also think that we have a lot of potential candidates, and every so often there's a point where there seems to be no one that could step into this role. Now you have Newsom, you have Whitmer, you have Stacey Abrams, you have Beto, you have like all of these people that people really in the Democratic Party get excited about and want to, fundraise for and want to have them bring those ideas to life. And so I think it gets harder for people to look at Biden and get excited about him when they see other people that really could perform on the policy that they want. So if there was no one waiting in the wings, then I think maybe it would change this a little bit. But because we have so many people that are like, hey, I could do that, and people are also reacting as yes, they could, we've got a different story.
So Biden in the State of the Union drew contrasts between him and his predecessor. He said 2 years ago, our economy was reeling. As I stand here tonight, we have created a record 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president has ever created in 4 years. 2 years ago, COVID shut down our businesses, closed our schools, robbed us of our of so much. Today, COVID no longer controls our lives. In other words, do you remember 2020? Does anyone seriously want to go back to Trump? He's also talked about inflation. He said inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war that disrupted energy as well as food supplies have contributed to what we're experiencing, and why prices are so high at the gas pump sometimes, or early this summer, and at the grocery store. He said, but we're better positioned than any other country on earth. We have more to do, but here at home, inflation is coming down. He talked about abortion. This is the first State of the Union address after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which would have been 50 years old. That Supreme Court ruling would have been 50 years old this year. He said, the vice president and I are doing everything we can to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient privacy. He talked about the debt ceiling stare contest. He said, in the last 2 years, my administration cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, America's deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because of those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor, he said. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt, a debt that took 200 years to accumulate, was added by that administration alone. And, I thought those were some excellent points. Now, the response to the State of the Union used to be seen as the kind of like a platform for those who are making the step above to get to the national stage. And, of course, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the newly elected governor of Arkansas, who was the former press secretary for President Trump. And I think she was the press secretary during that COVID time, or I guess right before COVID really started to get, really huge death tolls in this country. Well, she gives the response, and I want to go ahead and take a listen.
Faith propels us to charge boldly ahead. We can't stand still in the face of great challenges. You and I were put on this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country.
So, in other words, she was doubling down on some of the culture war points that many of these Republicans have been making. You heard in there, she was alluding to critical race theory. She was, making the argument that, Democrats cannot, quote unquote, explain what a woman is. They are a woke mob. I thought those points, I guess, catered to only a specific sector of the American public. And overall, I think it was a missed opportunity to respond to the content of what was said in the State of the Union address. I don't think it was responsive at all. I think it was more of she took it, mind you, many of those who were, I guess, involved in the decision to place Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the response role thought that she would not be a threat to Trump because she does not have aspirations for the presidency for this current cycle coming up. I thought after listening to that speech that she did have presidential ambitions. I thought that she was trying to introduce herself to that part of the electorate that was gung-ho for Trump. I mean, what do you guys think about the response?
I think I kind of have mixed ideas as you present it there, because the other oddity, as you say, she didn't respond directly to some of Biden's victory laps, if you will, or some of the things he was taking credit for. She also didn't talk a lot about Trump. I don't know that she even used the name Trump in her entire presentation or response. And I take your point that that's sort of playing to a very small base, that the talking about the woke issues or the radical woke mob is obviously an appeal to a very specific demographic within the Republican Party. I apologize, I shouldn't say demographic, group within the Republican Party, I'll say. But I don't know that this was, I mean, first of all, suspect even those of us who are political nerds would have a hard time remembering who gave the response over the last 20 years. The only one I can remember offhand is Marco Rubio. I don't remember a thing he said. I just remember he had the gaffe with the water bottle. That's all we could talk about for the longest while. So I'm not trying to diminish her. I'm not a fan of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but I'm not trying to diminish her. I guess I'm just suggesting that this is it's not surprising to me. I think I would be more surprised if we didn't have a Republican response that tried to truck in these sort of Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, woke notions.
Yeah, I feel like my takeaways were less about, I guess, her and her ambitions and more about just the rhetoric that was used and how, obviously this choosing her and then, writing this speech and the contents within it is not a her or just even her team decision. This is coming from the Republican Party. And I think the way that they are still sticking to this kind of like this bigotry really and this type of rhetoric that I believe has lost them the last 3 elections really, or has detrimentally hurt them the last 3 elections. So I'm just like so curious of when the Republican Party is going to kind of wake up and be like, maybe we need to shift back to, our values as the traditional Republican values. And I'm even curious, Josh, how you feel about it and how if I was a Republican, I would kind of hope that the response would be not in line with the way that the Republican Party has been behaving the past few years, I think it was a really missed opportunity for them to really kind of get their party back on track and shift away from the MAGA rhetoric and hopefully start to gain some trust back with moderate and independent Republican-leaning voters. So
I will be, since Maddie had mentioned me, I'll be extremely brief because I could talk for 2 hours about culture war issues. I wish the Republican Party would actually get to fighting the culture war. They haven't been for years. This is a performative, ridiculous battle facing straw men. When I say culture wars, I mean broader things that honestly there seems to be somewhat agreement between the left and the right. Why is the family broken? Why are institutions broken? Why is there an opioid epidemic? Why are people choosing to check out of this world? To me, that's a better understand what the culture war is than these kind of mindless games about who can or can't use a restroom. I'm not saying that those are irrelevant conversations, but we elevate things to such a degree that affects such a tiny minority within the United States. And you're correct. I wish the Republican Party would get back to more of those traditions. I wish we could have arguments that we used to have 20 years ago, rather than these things that don't really seem to help anyone.
But the problem is that, I guess I would disagree with you in this sense, Josh. You talked about how Ms. Huckabee's speech was directed as a small percentage of the base of the Republican Party, and I don't believe that's true, because she got elected. And people like her get elected. Ron DeSantis get elected by saying the same thing. And if you look, and unfortunately for me, my roommate from college is from Little Rock, Arkansas, so I talked to him about politics in Arkansas. And this is what she ran on. What she said after the speech is the same thing she said on the campaign trail on her way to being elected governor of Arkansas, a small state, 4 million people, max population, but she got elected because people who called themselves Republicans or independents or whatever voted for her, more voted for her than for her opponent. And it's because what she said resonated with them enough to get them to vote for her. And whether she drew a distinction between the woke mob or the transgender people, and that caused people to vote for her because the Democrat was saying something that was inconsistent with how they felt in their gut. This happens across the country. It's why the Republicans controlled so many state houses. It was lessened some in the last election, but it may go back the other way in the next election because of the political dynamics. That is to say, the personages who are running may not be as foul-smelling candidates as they were the last time around. but there were close elections where Democrats or so-called non-woke candidates won. So there's a huge appetite out there among the American electorate for this kind of nonsense, and I think it's nonsense. I think you're right to talk about how some of these the elevation of some of these arguments, these so-called culture war arguments about things that really don't matter in a macro sense, but they take on huge importance, and we run around spending time trying to draw lines about, well, where are you on this issue of whether transgender kids are going to be able to use a bathroom or be on a team, and there's so few of them. Why is this a national issue? But there are too many Republicans, too many good people, as Dr. King said, who stand by while bad people do bad things, who won't stop them. The bad people can only do what they do if the good people allow them to do it. And these Republicans who are elected, Missouri today, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives says a child who can have a gun in public space without supervision with their parent, because they believe that you have a constitutional right as a child to carry a gun wherever you good and well want to. That's insane. But people elected those people, and people won't unelect those people. It's the same argument I use, like I said before, with the Donald Trump analogy. You can have crazy tax policies that I call crazy. You can have a border policy that I disagree with. You can talk about all sorts of things that I disagree with politically, but the articulator of that policy doesn't have to be a complete and total jerk. But for some reason, that jerk or that jerk behavior is seen as a indicia of you're really with the program and I'm going to support you. To me, it's just nuts. But we have collectively sunk to a place where that kind of stuff makes sense to more people, and I'm very afraid that there may be more of them than there are of us. And that doesn't mean that we all have to agree on everything, but I think there are more people who are more interested in tearing things down than building things up.
So let's pivot a little bit back to, I guess, electoral politics. You have former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who's expected to announce that she is officially a candidate for the presidency on the 15th of this month. She's pulling key support from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who seems to be the flavor of several months right now for the Republican Party. And that's according to a hypothetical GOP 2024 presidential primary matchup. And that puts the former President Trump ahead in a three-way race. The Yahoo News YouGov poll found that DeSantis leads Trump in a hypothetical head-to-head matchup 45% to 41%. But with Haley in the mix, Trump leads with 38% support to DeSantis' 35% support. According to 538, you have Biden at 41% compared to DeSantis at 36%. That's according to polls that ended on February the 6th of this year. You also have Trump leading slightly above Biden, 42% to 40% in a general election matchup. And so, of course, these numbers are only a snapshot in time. But I had my former guest, the co-author of How Democracies Die, Professor Steve Levitsky of Harvard University, say that the Republican Party is not going to choose someone like Chris Sununu. Chris Sununu, of course, has taken a major step towards his own announcement for president in his own, I guess, a super PAC, you want to call it, the Live Free or Die Hard, which is his slogan for New Hampshire. That committee borrowed from a state's nickname, is a 501c4. It's an organization where politicians can raise unlimited funds of money, and the donations do not have to be disclosed. And prospective candidates use these political nonprofits as a way to gouge interest from donors. Chris Sununu looks like he's going to jump into the race, but he said that the Republican Party is not going to choose someone like Chris Sununu. If they're going to choose someone that's not Trump, it's going to be someone to the right of Trump. What are your thoughts on these potential matchups, potential candidates? And that's according, of course, to another story that was published this week, that Trump is now going to be modeling himself or positioning himself as the dove compared to hawks. You have John Bolton also expressing that he is going to be a candidate for the presidency this cycle. Anyone?
Mitt Romney 2024.
Well, Mitt Romney has exhibited much more courage to go head to toe with George Santos, I would say, than most of his party, in calling him out for his outright lies.
I don't, as much as I would love to see Mitt Romney run in 2024, that's not going to happen. I agree with your prior guest that we're not going to nominate Sununu. That doesn't mean we're going to have to nominate Donald Trump. And Professor Cook, when you were talking there, and I did not mean to imply that I'm in the majority that is not into this wokeism crap. I recognize I'm within the minority within my party.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I think that there is a and I know plenty of people will disagree with this. My own personal opinion is that the underlying driving force within much of the right today is not bigotry, it's not hatred, it's populism, it's anti-establishmentarianism. Or the word is a mouthful. It's the idea that our elites or those pulling the strings are somehow they don't care about us or they're not working in our best interest. And this is ripe for someone like a Donald Trump to come in in a demagogic role and say, I speak on behalf of the people against this elite class. But it doesn't have to be Donald Trump. And I think this is where, Mike, I would take issue with your guest. I mean, it may be true to say that if anybody's going to defeat Trump, they're going to have to swing to his right. But I don't see politics as this sliding scale that if you go to Trump's right, you're a fascist, say. I think there's a lot of ways in which I am to Trump's right, that I would prefer policies further to the right. That doesn't mean on January the 6th, I'm going to suggest anybody go storm the Capitol. And I think that's where maybe we ought to be careful that I think what the GOP is ultimately going to end up with is not a Sununu, it's not a Mitt Romney, it's someone who's a fighter. But a fighter does not have to be someone who's a demagogue or someone who works to dismantle the system.
And of course, with two of his former top foreign policy aides potentially jumping into the race, you have Nikki Haley, John Bolton, like I mentioned. Trump's team is making early moves to define the debate. And Donald Trump is settling on a simple foreign policy pitch in his second bid for the White House. Over the past week, Trump has assailed Biden's handling of Afghanistan. He said that he could end the almost year-long conflict in Ukraine within 24 hours, but without any indication of how, and suggested sending tanks to the country could spark nuclear war. That actually reminds me of Nixon's secret plan in '68 when he ran on this plan to potentially end the Vietnam War. And of course, we know that the bombings in Cambodia escalated. That's just like a side note. But it's interesting that Trump is going to be, positioning himself as a dove, among hawks, especially when, many of us, I guess, have seen his foreign policy. We saw him take out Soleimani despite, protests from many within his inner circle and national security team saying this would spark a domino effect in that region. We've seen him, usually, I guess, lean towards having people around him like James Mad Dog Mattis, who had a reputation for being hardliners when it came to foreign policy. Anyone else?
Well, I mean, I just I respect his honesty about the fact that he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. If you give up and say Russia have it, then it's done. So that's pretty straight shooting from him. I want to make sure that I have the chance of having a possible career in future. So I'm not going to say what's currently going through my mind. But
step out there, Zach. Step out there.
Not a skilled foreign policy man in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to leave it at that.
So before I let everyone go, former Vice President Mike Pence was subpoenaed today by the general counsel, by a special counsel who is leading investigations into former President Donald Trump, and that's according to multiple reports. According to ABC News, which cited multiple unnamed sources, Pence was subpoenaed after negotiations between federal officials and his legal team. Jack Smith, which is the DOJ's special counsel, has been leading investigations into Trump since November of 2022, when Attorney General Merrick Garland assigned him to this position to lead these probes. CNN reported that the subpoena was tied to the DOJ's investigation into the January 6th insurrection, citing an unnamed source, and that prosecutors are seeking testimony and documents linked to that day from the former vice president. Professor, I'm going to start off with you. What are your thoughts about this, and I guess any predictions from you about what this would result in? Mike Pence, of course, was on record when he was on a one-on-one interview with David Muir, and he said, "I have not taken any classified documents." And of course, I guess maybe people thought that eroded some credibility of his. Of course, to be fair, Biden also, said, he didn't suspect that he had any documents. And of course, we know that both of those gentlemen had documents in their respective places of residence. That aside, what do you think about this current probe now that Mike Pence seems to be called to the stand to, I guess, give his take on what transpired that day?
Well, I mean, look, as a former prosecutor type person and as a former defense counsel type person, I'm of two minds. But I think that Mike Pence, any official of the government of Donald Trump at the time, has an affirmative obligation to respond to subpoenas and to tell what they know about the incidents, the events of January 6th. There is no privilege for committing a crime. There is no privilege for information that he's already shared with other people. So he should testify. But I think Mr. Smith should be prepared to litigate the viability of his subpoena to the Supreme Court, because from a political point of view, Mike Pence's, the only real dirt he has to stand on is to say no to a biased investigation and resist it. And if he is forced by the court to do it, then he's forced by the court to do it. But he is not cooperating with what is going to be characterized by many on his side as an invalid investigation. But I think he's got an obligation to do it. I'm pleased that Jack Smith is moving forward after negotiating and not continuing to negotiate to he turns purple, but just to say, okay, we talked long enough. You say no, we say yes. I'll go to court. We'll figure it out. It's the right thing to do.
Anyone else? Do you see the Trump orbit leaning heavily on Pence to not comply or not, I guess, participate or not cooperate, I should say, easily with Jack Smith?
I don't think he needs to be encouraged by the Trump orbit. I think he needs to be governed by the laws of physics of the current Republican Party. I think he's got to say no as long as he can, whether Trump wants him to or not.
No one received more pressure than Mike Pence on January the 6th from the, shall we say, Trump orbit. And as much as I am not a big fan of the former vice president, he didn't buckle to that pressure. And I don't get the sense that would be the same here. I don't get Mike Pence. He's tap dancing on a tightrope so far as I can tell, trying to thread this needle of not offending MAGA America while still at the same time saying things that are obviously going to infuriate them. So I don't think he would not cooperate, but I could be wrong.
You think he will cooperate?
I think that he will.
Okay.
And of course, that's going to be interesting to see. Mike Pence, of course, has been taking the traditional route with his book tour and with being more transparent about what happened in the hours leading up to the January 6th insurrection, to see what role this plays as Mike Pence enters the 2024 GOP primary. I always said that there are people, Trump is going to be able to destroy Mike Pence and say, he betrayed us. He could have stood up and, stopped the Biden presidency from happening. And like Bannon said, killed it in the crib, and he didn't. And, that Trump base is very much still a prominent part of the party, I believe, outside the Beltway. We'll see that a lot of people aren't so willing to move on to a DeSantis, I think, in the upcoming months. But if there are no other thoughts, I want to go ahead and thank each of you for what you brought to the table. Zach Tolan, Josh Lewis, hosts of the Saving Elephants podcast. Check it out. And Josh, where can we find the Saving Elephants podcast?
SavingElephantsBlog.com.
SavingElephants.com. Awesome. Check that out. Sammy Cantor, Maddie Medved, thank you so much for what you brought to the table. Where can we find the Girl and the Gov podcast for those who are interested?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us again. It's been great. Girl on the Go, the podcast can be found anywhere you listen to pods. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We do have a YouTube, so our interview episodes are there for the top stories. We don't do video for that, so sorry to the people. But like I said, anywhere you listen to pods, Girl on the Go, the podcast can be found.
And you launched a new project of mine. Am I correct?
Yes. We just launched our podcast consulting unit within our larger consulting segment, which is really geared towards political podcasts. So we're going after elected officials, organizations, and have you that are looking to launch podcasts or have one, don't know how to get it off the ground. We have numerous years of experience in that segment and are here to lend our expertise.
Thank you so much. And Professor Cook, thank you again for bringing the wealth of knowledge you always bring to the table. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 96 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all so much.